Alright, this is kind of going to be part 2 of the last movie, kind of an extension. I have the exact same setup that I had before, with everything parented to the skeleton. All of the geometry is parented to the skeleton except one of the legs. So I've got a bunch of empty groups, and then I have leg L group. So I know my left leg is in this group. And I open my skeleton, and I want to, sorry, not skeleton hip right, I want skeleton hip left. This is why it's kind of important to name things so you can see exactly what you're doing. Now, essentially, the hip, sorry, I want the left hip, would probably help if I knew my right from left. But at any rate, the left hip geometry isn't going to rotate around any particular joint, so I'm going to parent that. I'm just going to middle click and drag that down to the skeleton. One thing I didn't mention before in the other video is excuse me, is that my skeleton is rooted right here in the center of his pelvis. That joint's not really going to rotate at all, it's just there because I needed to root the skeleton to something. So now that I have my left hip rooted to that, I can grab my left thigh, and this is going to get parented to the left hip joint itself. So middle click and drag down to where I see skele hip L, because the thigh and the knee, which I'm going to grab here, are both going to rotate around that hip joint. So down to skele hip L, you can see the thigh and the knee are down there. And then I'm going to grab the shin, the left shin, and the left shin is going to rotate around the knee. So down to skeleton, knee left. The ankle as well is going to rotate around the knee. Really, I know that the ankle geometry doesn't actually rotate around the knee. Really, the ankle geometry should be attached to the shin, but since I used separate pieces for them, I have to make sure this is the ankle is attached to the knee as well. And the only thing I have left is the left foot. Middle click and drag the left foot down to skeleton, ankle, left. I named the toe and the heel joints even though they're not going to do a darn thing for me. Okay. So now that that's all parented, really I could get rid of the dummy geo group, but I'm actually going to leave it for now. And I'm just going to close that, close out my outliner. And if I hit the right button, now you can see if I grab the ankle joint, here, we'll shut off select surface object, so I can't select any of his geometry. If I grab the ankle joint, grab my rotate tool, now you can see his foot will rotate around it with no deforming like it did with the other, if we were to bind skin to it. Now, when I set up the skeleton, I did the same thing. There's a slight curve in his knee. His knee is slightly forward, and his hip and ankle are slightly back, so that I can use an IK chain in this situation as well. So if I grab my IK handle tool and I select his hip, and then I select where his ankle should be, his ankle, you can see that it does indeed create an IK chain. And if I grab that lovely IK handle, now you can see that although I do have objects intersecting, there's no deforming of it. It's not bending, it's not squishing. So that's good in terms of what I'm modeling. Since I'm modeling a wooden dummy, he shouldn't be squashing and stretching. The same thing goes here. If I grab the shoulder and put an IK chain from shoulder to wrist, you can see that it rotates rather than squishing. So essentially with this one, I've got a skeleton I can use for this particular subject matter in more of a realistic fashion. If I were to bind skin to it and get the squash and the stretch thing going on, that's useful if I'm going to be doing something like a cartoon type, something with exaggerated motion. On this one, I really just wanted more sort of a realistic movement in that sense. So essentially I have 4 IK chains, and I don't know if I want to put any more in. I think the rest I can probably do manually. That's basically up to you. You could do it all manually if you wanted instead of doing IK chains. But now I'll probably I'm going to put in controls for this dummy. There'll be controls that are easier for me to get to for the IK chains. I will put controls in to aim his elbows so that I can, if I want to have his elbow pointing down, I don't have to do one of these numbers. If I want him to bend at the elbows with his elbows pointing down. Other than that, in the previous lessons we went over how to do controls. We went over now the skeleton and how to either bind skin to it or just parent the geometry to it. So you should have all the tools you need to at least make this. Just thinking about what my project is going to entail with finishing off this movie, I still need to go into Photoshop and make a wood grain texture that I can apply to him so that he's got color other than gray. I have to obviously put in the controls. I'll put in controls for, like I said, aiming his elbows when his elbows bend. I will be putting in controls for his knees, for aiming his knees when they bend. And these IK chains should be sticky. Selecting multiple IK chains and changing them to sticky all at once doesn't work. So you have to do that. But now that I've got them set sticky, see, his feet stay in place, but the reason I need to set controls for aiming his knees is when I make him crouch, his knees cross. And they do some crazy, crazy things. So I'll also be putting in controls for his feet so that when he does jump, obviously when you jump you don't just take off flying, so his feet will have to automatically point down, something like that. When you're rigging a character, I can't stress how important it is to spend all the extra time putting in all the controls and setting driven keys, which we'll go over later probably, before you start animating it. Because if you get halfway through animating a movie and then you realize you want to add another control, that's a whole nightmare in itself. If you think you might want to use a control later, put it in. If you don't ever use it, oh well. If you use the model for a different movie, at least you'll have the control then. So I tend to go a little overboard in terms of adding controls and making sure that my model works perfectly before I start animating it, just because it saves you so much time on the animation, and that's really what takes a lot of time, is the animation, making sure it looks either realistic or cartoon effects if that's what you're going for. So take your time on your model and make sure that you get that right before you start doing all the animation. Again, any questions, comments, concerns, snide remarks, go ahead and leave those in the comments. Otherwise, have fun, screw around with all this stuff, see what you can come up with, and that's it for me today, right now. Out!